Zara Mitchell had stopped believing in lucky breaks a long time ago. Life had trained her that every opportunity came with a sharp hook hidden inside it. At 32, she was an exhausted night shift nurse with dark circles carved into her face and a phone full of unanswered debt collection messages. The latest came that morning. Final notice. Payment must be made within 72 hours to avoid legal escalation. It wasn't even her debt, it was her younger brother Caleb's. His last brush with the law had racked up legal fees so high she'd need to work 3 jobs for the next 4 years just to make a dent. And she was already running on fumes. That Thursday evening she left St. Luke's Hospital and stepped into the damp New York air, the kind that smelled faintly of rain and car exhaust. She was fishing in her tote bag for her MetroCard when a glossy black town car rolled to a slow, deliberate stop in front of her. The back window slid down halfway, just enough for her to catch a glimpse of a man in a perfectly pressed driver's uniform. "Miss Mitchell?" His voice was warm but precise, like he'd practiced saying her name. Zara froze. "Yes." He smiled faintly, revealing teeth so straight they probably cost more than her rent. "I've been asked to deliver you to an employer. It's regarding a job offer." Her grip on her tote tightened. "I'm not looking for anything right now." The driver's eyes didn't flicker. $10,000 a week. The city noise seemed to fade for a moment. She actually laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "I'm sorry, what?" $10,000 per week. No catch. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out an ivory envelope, sealed with a gold crest she didn't recognize. "If you'd like to hear the details, Miss Rothschild will explain them herself." Zara glanced up and down the street, torn between curiosity and the very real possibility that she was about to be kidnapped. But the truth was, she couldn't remember the last time she had $200 in her checking account. She slid into the car. The Rothschild estate sat behind gates, so tall they seemed to scrape the clouds. The driveway curled like a black ribbon through perfectly manicured lawns, ending in front of a limestone mansion that looked as though it belonged on the cover of an architecture magazine. Inside, the air smelled faintly of white lilies and money. Genevieve Rothschild entered the room as if she had been poured into it, a slim, graceful figure draped in a silk dressing gown the color of champagne. Her blonde hair spilled over her shoulders like something out of an old Hollywood movie, and she wore diamonds like they were her birthright. "Zara Mitchell." Her voice was honeyed, drawn out like she was tasting the syllables. "I've heard good things." Zara didn't move from the chair where the butler had deposited her. "From who?" "I don't exactly have fans." Genevieve smiled as though that was amusing. "I need someone unique. Someone who understands the art of presence without the nuisance of conversation. Someone who can lie beside me at night and simply exist." "You want to hire me to sleep beside you?" "Yes." Genevieve sipped her wine without breaking eye contact. $10,000 a week. No intimacy. No questions. You arrive before sunset, leave after sunrise. You sleep beside me and you do not ask why. Zara laughed nervously. "That's not a normal job description." "No," Genevieve agreed. "But I'm not a normal woman." Against every instinct screaming in her head, Zara said yes. The first night, Zara lay stiffly in the enormous 4-poster bed, the silk sheets cool against her skin. Genevieve slid in beside her without a word, her perfume wrapping around them both like a warm, expensive cloud. The heiress's breathing slowed, and just when Zara thought she had drifted off, Genevieve leaned close and whispered into her ear. 9. Zara opened her eyes in the dark. 9 what? No answer. Just the slow, steady rhythm of Genevieve's breath. The second night was the same. Zara lay there, counting the seconds, feeling her pulse race for no reason she could name. Genevieve was warm against her side, her hair tickling Zara's arm. Then the whisper came again, softer this time. 8. Zara turned her head. "Genevieve, what does that mean?" Genevieve's lips curled into the faintest smile. She didn't speak again. And that was the moment Zara realized she'd stepped into something far stranger than she'd ever imagined, and $10,000 a week might not be enough. By the end of the first week, Zara's bank account looked like it belonged to someone else. $10,000. Wired on time, without deductions, without questions. Then another 10,000. The weight that had been sitting on her chest for months began to lift, replaced by something sharper, something almost like paranoia. The Rothschild mansion was more than just big. It was theatrical. Gilded mirrors caught the light and multiplied it, chandeliers glowed like captured suns, and every hallway smelled faintly of something expensive and hard to name. But the beauty had edges. 3 rules had been explained to her by the butler, Mr. Keene, in the same voice a judge might use to read a verdict. Be in bed by 10 p.m. sharp. Do not enter the East Wing. Never answer the red phone on the nightstand. The rules had been delivered without elaboration, and when Zara asked why, Keene had just looked at her with an expression that somehow managed to be both polite and pitying. By the second week, Zara noticed how the mansion seemed to shift with the hours. In the daylight, it was all soft luxury, the sound of fountains in the courtyard, the gentle sweep of maids in crisp uniforms polishing silver. But at night, it changed. The corridors felt too long, the silence too complete, like the house was holding its breath. She once tested the first rule, staying in the library until 10:07, just to see what would happen. At exactly 10:08, Mr. Keene appeared in the doorway without a sound. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice calm but firm, "the lady prefers punctuality." It wasn't a request. On a Tuesday evening, Genevieve invited her to dinner in the smaller of the 2 dining rooms. Smaller meaning it only seated 12. Genevieve was in a gown the color of crushed emeralds, her blonde hair swept into a chignon, her skin glowing under the amber light. The table between them was set with silverware so polished Zara could see her reflection in the spoons. The food was exquisite, pan-seared sea bass, roasted vegetables, and a wine so smooth it made Zara feel as though her entire body had exhaled. Genevieve cut her fish with slow precision, as though every motion was a performance. "Did you know," she began casually, "that I've been disinherited twice?" Zara set her fork down. "I didn't know people could be disinherited twice." Genevieve's lips curved in amusement. "Oh, darling, you'd be amazed what money can undo and redo." "What happened?" "The first time? Boredom. I was 22, restless, and, let's just say I made choices that reflected poorly on the family name." She swirled her wine. "The second time, well, I prefer not to talk about that over fish." Zara raised a brow. "And now?" Genevieve leaned back in her chair, eyes locking onto Zara's like she was about to share a secret that could topple empires. "Now, I've been welcomed back into the fold. Fully reinstated into my late father's will." Her tone was light, but there was a shadow in her gaze, a sharpness that didn't match the silkiness of her voice. She leaned in slightly, her diamonds catching the candlelight. "Timing," she said softly, "is everything." For a moment, Zara thought Genevieve's eyes flickered, something between thrill and fear, before she smiled again and changed the subject to the merits of Parisian over Venetian silk. That night, as Zara climbed into bed, she glanced at the red phone on the nightstand. It sat there like a coiled snake, glossy and silent. She imagined it ringing in the darkness, imagined lifting the receiver and hearing something she could never unhear. Genevieve slid into bed beside her, hair loose now, smelling faintly of jasmine and wine. 9, she had whispered on the first night. 8, on the second. Tonight, she didn't say a number at all. She just let her fingertips rest against Zara's wrist, as if checking her pulse. Zara stared into the dark, counting her own heartbeat until she fell asleep. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with a sound too soft to be the wind. The rain had been falling all night, thin silver lines against the tall windows of the mansion. It was the kind of steady, whispering rain that made the house seem more isolated than usual, like it existed in its own sealed-off world. Zara had been reading in bed, waiting for Genevieve to finish a late phone call, when she heard it. Faint. Almost delicate. Crying. At first, she thought it was the wind, catching somewhere in the eaves. But then she heard it again. A soft, uneven sob that seemed to bleed through the walls. It was coming from the East Wing. Her mind went straight to the rules. Do not enter the East Wing. But the sound pulled at her, threading through her curiosity and her nurse's instinct in equal measure. She told herself she'd just check. Just make sure no one was hurt. The hallway to the east wing was darker than the rest of the house, the sconces fewer and the shadows longer. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of dust and something metallic, like old coins or dried blood. The crying grew clearer, not loud, but sharp in its desperation. Zara followed it until she reached a heavy double door. One side was sealed shut, the gap between the panels lined with steel brackets that had been bolted into place. She stepped closer and froze. The wood bore long, frantic scratches, not on the outside, but from the inside. She knelt slightly, her fingers brushing over the grooves, the roughness biting into her fingertips. They weren't random marks. They were the kind made by someone trying to get out. Her heart pounded, each beat loud in her ears. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely carrying. The crying stopped. "Zara." Her whole body went rigid. She turned to see Genevieve standing a few feet away in a silk robe the color of midnight, her hair loose and gleaming in the dim light. She was barefoot, the hem of her robe just grazing the polished floor. But it was her smile that made the hair on the back of Zara's neck rise, too wide, too calm, as though she had caught Zara doing something amusing rather than suspicious. "You're up late," Genevieve said softly. Zara opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find a believable excuse. "I thought I heard." "7," Genevieve interrupted, the word floating out like a sigh. Zara blinked. "7 what?" Genevieve's smile deepened. She stepped forward, her perfume enveloping them both, warm and expensive. "You ask too many questions," she murmured. "Come back to bed." Zara hesitated, her eyes flicking to the sealed door. Genevieve followed her gaze for just a second, then looked back at her. "Some doors," she said lightly, "are meant to stay closed." And with that, she turned and began walking away, barefoot steps silent against the wood. That night, Zara's sleep was restless, the rain still whispering against the windows. She dreamed she was underwater, but the water was not blue, it was molten gold, shimmering in the dim light. It filled her lungs slowly, warmly, pulling her down. Above the surface, Genevieve stood at the edge of a pool, her silk robe billowing like smoke. She was smiling again, the same wide, knowing smile. 9, she said. Then 8. Then 7. Each number sank Zara deeper, the gold closing over her head until the world went silent. She woke with a sharp gasp, her sheets damp with sweat, her heart racing. Beside her, Genevieve lay still, her breathing slow, one arm draped loosely over Zara's waist as though nothing at all had happened. But in the dim moonlight, Zara thought she saw something on Genevieve's wrist, faint red marks, like someone had been holding her there too tightly. She closed her eyes and tried to convince herself she was imagining things. Tried, and failed. The house was so quiet at night that Zara could hear the faint hum of the electricity in the walls. She'd gotten used to the rhythm, the way the air felt heavy after midnight, how the chandeliers went dark in the halls, leaving the mansion lit only by the pale spill of moonlight. But at exactly 3 a.m., the silence shattered. The red phone on the nightstand rang. It wasn't a normal ring, not a cheerful trill or an electronic chime. It was sharp, metallic. Almost urgent. Zara froze under the silk sheets, every muscle in her body locking up. The rule flashed in her mind like a warning sign. Never answer the red phone. Beside her, Genevieve lay perfectly still, her breathing slow, lashes casting delicate shadows on her cheeks. For a moment, Zara thought she was asleep, until she heard her murmur in that drowsy, velvety voice. 6. Zara's pulse thudded in her ears. 6 days? 6 hours? 6 victims? The phone rang again, loud in the stillness. She told herself to leave it, to pretend she hadn't heard. But her hand moved on its own, reaching toward the receiver as if pulled by something stronger than curiosity. She picked it up. "Hello." For a moment, there was nothing. Just the faint hiss of the line. Then a man's voice, low and urgent, cutting through the static. "You're running out of time." Zara sat up, her throat tightening. "Who is this?" "Get out," the voice whispered. before she does to you what she did to the others." Her mouth went dry. "Others? What are you talking about?" The voice didn't answer. A click, and the line went dead. Zara sat in the dark for a long moment, the receiver still pressed to her ear, her skin prickling with cold sweat. She turned slowly toward Genevieve. The heiress was motionless, her breathing even, her face the picture of innocence in sleep. But something about her stillness felt wrong. Zara set the receiver back in its cradle, her fingers trembling. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Morning came too bright. The rain had stopped, and sunlight spilled across the marble floors like it didn't know anything was wrong. Zara made coffee in the silent kitchen, her hands still unsteady. She told herself she wasn't going to think about the phone call. She wasn't going to let her imagination get away from her. She poured the coffee, opened her laptop, and stopped breathing. Her bank account balance had jumped. Not by 10,000. By 50. $50,000, wired in from an untraceable source. Her cursor hovered over the transaction details. Under notes was a single phrase. "For your silence." The coffee went cold in her hands. At breakfast, Genevieve was in one of her sunlight moods, wearing a pale yellow silk blouse and sipping champagne like it was orange juice. "You look tired," she said lightly, her eyes glinting over the rim of her glass. "Didn't sleep well," Zara replied, careful to keep her tone neutral. Genevieve tilted her head, studying her in that way that made Zara feel both seen and dissected. "Dreams? Something like that." A slow smile spread across Genevieve's face. "Dreams can be warnings, you know. Little gifts from your subconscious." Zara's skin prickled. Genevieve leaned forward just slightly, her voice low but playful. "But then again, some warnings are just distractions." She let the words hang in the air before changing the subject to a new art installation opening downtown. Zara barely heard her. She was too busy replaying the voice on the phone, the way he'd said the others. Somewhere in this gilded house, Zara realized, there were ghosts. They just weren't the kind that rattled chains. They were the kind that left $50,000 in your bank account and waited for you to decide whether you wanted to live long enough to spend it. The shift in Genevieve was subtle at first, the kind of change that could be explained away by a bad night's sleep or a hangover from too much champagne. But over the next few days, the eccentric grace that had once defined her began to crack like old porcelain. Zara noticed it in the way Genevieve would burst into fits of laughter in the middle of the night, the sound high and strange, as though she were sharing a private joke with someone who wasn't there. Doors that had always been open during the day were suddenly locked. Not just to Zara, but to the staff as well. The East Wing, of course, remained sealed, but now the West Library and the music room were off-limits, too. One afternoon, Zara caught a glimpse of Genevieve in the great room, kneeling in front of the marble fireplace. She was feeding handfuls of cream-colored envelopes into the flames, her silk nightgown slipping down one bare shoulder. The wax seals on the letters melted and hissed as the fire devoured them. When Zara asked if everything was all right, Genevieve didn't answer. She just turned her head slowly and smiled, her lips painted a shade too red for daylight. That night, Genevieve emerged from her dressing room for bed wearing perfume so thick and sweet it clung to the air like fog. It was almost suffocating, a heady mix of jasmine and something metallic underneath. She lay down beside Zara, still wearing diamond earrings and a silk slip that shimmered in the low light. By morning, the scent had turned sour in the heat of the night, and Genevieve's skin was slick with sweat. She didn't apologize for it. The next morning, breakfast was tense. The dining room's crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the silverware, making everything sparkle like a stage set. Zara sat across from Genevieve, who was picking at a plate of sliced melon with the languid precision of a cat playing with prey. Genevieve looked up suddenly, her pupils too large for the daylight, and said, "5." Zara felt her shoulders tense. "5?" she echoed, her voice calm but her chest tightening. Genevieve's gaze didn't waver. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her bracelets clinking softly like tiny chains. Her voice dropped low enough that even the servants, standing silently along the wall, couldn't hear. "You're my favorite so far." She let the words hang for a moment, her eyes locked on Zara's. Then, with a faint smile, she added, "Don't disappoint me." Zara didn't answer. Her spoon hovered over her untouched coffee, hand trembling almost imperceptibly. She didn't know which part to process first, the number, the compliment, or the threat buried inside it. The rest of breakfast was performed like a play for an invisible audience. Genevieve talked about Paris, about the opera she wanted to attend in Vienna, about how tired she was of people pretending not to know what they really want. Her tone was light, but every now and then, her voice would dip into something darker, something that curled around Zara's spine and stayed there. When Zara left the table, she could still feel Genevieve's gaze trailing her like a shadow. She went straight to her room, locked the door, and sat on the bed staring at her phone. Her bank account balance still glittered with its unearned fortune. The extra 50,000 was untouched, but now, more than ever, she wondered if keeping it meant sealing herself into whatever game Genevieve was playing. From somewhere deep in the mansion, faintly muffled by distance and walls, Zara thought she heard it again, crying. Low, desperate, and cut short, as if someone had placed a hand over the mouth of the sound. She pressed her hands to her face, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The countdown was getting shorter. And whatever happened when it reached 0, Zara wasn't sure she'd be able to buy her way out. The rain had been falling all night, drumming steadily against the tall arched windows of Genevieve's mansion. Zara waited until the sound of Genevieve's footsteps faded down the hall, slow, deliberate, and wrapped in the creak of old hardwood, before slipping out of her room. The study was at the far end of the West Wing, a place Genevieve rarely let her linger. It was a museum of intimidation, mahogany shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes, the faint musk of aged paper hanging thick in the air, and an oil portrait of Genevieve's father staring down with a gaze so sharp it felt alive. The desk sat beneath it, an antique beast with claw feet and brass handles, its surface pristine except for a single silver letter opener and a neat stack of envelopes. Zara moved with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. She wasn't snooping for curiosity's sake. This felt like survival. The way Genevieve had been behaving lately, locking doors, burning letters, speaking in cryptic numbers, it was as if the walls themselves were closing in. Her fingers brushed over the top drawer. The second drawer gave a soft click, almost like a sigh, when she tugged. Inside, under a pile of irrelevant receipts and old invitations, she found it, a crisp, cream-colored document folded neatly inside a manila envelope. Zara's hands trembled as she slid it free, her pulse pounding loud enough to drown out the rain. She expected the usual, clauses about art collections, stipulations about charities, maybe a few family squabbles immortalized in legalese. But this wasn't that. Her eyes scanned the amendment, the language twisting like a knife as she read. In the event of my daughter Genevieve's peaceful passing in her sleep before the date of her 29th birthday, the estate, in its entirety, shall transfer to the trust for continuation, to be administered by the appointed beneficiary whose identity shall remain confidential. Zara's throat tightened. Peaceful passing in her sleep? The phrasing was so specific, it was sinister. And the date, the 29th birthday, she glanced toward the calendar pinned discreetly on the side wall. 5 days from now. Her brain scrambled backward, replaying the strange countdown Genevieve had been muttering since that first night. 7. And this morning, 5. Zara's stomach dropped. The countdown wasn't random. It wasn't some eccentric quirk. It was the number of nights left until Genevieve's birthday. The hairs on her arms rose as an icy thought crept in. If the will only activated upon Genevieve's death, then who exactly stood to gain? And why was the beneficiary's name hidden? She tucked the document back exactly as she'd found it, every motion careful and deliberate. The study felt heavier now, the air thick with an unseen presence. A sudden creak sounded from behind her. Zara froze. Couldn't sleep? Genevieve's voice was soft, melodic, but it carried an edge that made Zara's blood run cold. Zara turned slowly. Genevieve was framed in the doorway, her silk robe cinched loosely, hair tumbling over her shoulders like she'd stepped out of a perfume ad. But her eyes, they were locked on Zara, unblinking. I heard the rain, Zara managed. Thought I'd make tea. Genevieve smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Tea. At this hour. She drifted into the room, trailing a scent of that heavy perfume she'd recently taken to wearing. You know, my father always said the study reveals a person's true character. What they touch. What they avoid. What they think they can hide. Zara forced a polite laugh, praying her voice wouldn't crack. Beautiful room. Almost too beautiful to use. Genevieve's gaze lingered on the desk for a moment longer, then returned to Zara. 4, she said softly, as if to herself. The words slithered through the air, cold and final. Zara's heart hammered as she brushed past her, muttering something about tea again, and made her way back toward her room. Every step felt like a warning. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to lean toward her. By the time she shut her door and pressed her back to it, the truth was cemented in her mind. She was part of something she didn't understand, something ticking toward a deadline. And if she didn't figure out what peaceful passing really meant, she might not survive to hear one. The night of the celebration began with a kind of hush that didn't feel festive at all. The mansion was lit like a movie set, golden chandeliers spilling warm light over every inch of the marble floors, shadows stretching long and strange along the hallways. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and something else, sharper, almost metallic, as if the house itself knew something was about to happen. Zara stood in the kitchen, staring at the wine bottles lined up like soldiers. The crystal decanters beside them glistened with deep red liquid, and at the far end of the counter sat a small cobalt blue vial. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, catching the light like crushed pearls. The label was gone, peeled clean, leaving no clue. Genevieve swept in wearing a floor-length silk gown the color of fresh cream, her dark hair piled high and held with gold pins. She didn't just enter a room, she possessed it. "You'll pour this," she said, sliding the vial toward Zara. Her voice was soft, but threaded with something that made Zara's skin prickle. Zara hesitated. "What is it?" Genevieve smiled without showing teeth. "It's the reason they'll remember me forever." The guests began to arrive. Not the usual polished socialites Zara had expected, but a strange collection of people. There was a man in a velvet blazer with a jagged scar cutting across his chin, a woman with diamonds so big they looked almost fake, a pair of brothers who laughed too loudly at nothing in particular. None of them seemed to know each other well, but they greeted Genevieve like they'd been waiting for this night their whole lives. Zara moved through the room with the wine, the vial's contents already mixed into each bottle. The guests accepted their glasses eagerly, sipping with an almost ceremonial reverence. She tried to ignore the pounding in her chest. It was halfway through the night when one of the guests, a ruddy-faced man in his late 50s, pulled her aside near the grand staircase. His breath smelled of tannin and smoke. "You know," he said in a half-whisper, "she's going to be a legend after this." Zara froze. "After what?" The man grinned, a slow, oily stretch of lips. "And you'll be rich too, if you're loyal." He tapped his temple as if sharing some great wisdom, then drifted back toward the others, leaving the words hanging in the air like smoke. Zara's pulse thudded in her ears. Her mind kept replaying his tone, the certainty in it. She wanted to ask more, but every time she looked over, Genevieve's eyes were already on her, glittering and watchful. The celebration stretched on until the air felt heavy with unspoken things. At midnight, Genevieve rose, clinking her glass for attention. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with satisfaction, "for being part of what's to come." No one asked what she meant. They only drank more. By the time the last guest left, Zara's nerves felt stripped raw. She washed glasses in the sink, hands trembling slightly as she replayed every moment. What had she just helped serve? Later, in the dim hush of the master bedroom, Genevieve slid into bed beside her. The silk sheets whispered with their movements. Genevieve's perfume was stronger than usual, thick, heady, almost suffocating, mingling with the faint scent of wine still clinging to her. She pressed close, her skin cool against Zara's. One hand trailed slowly down Zara's arm, fingertips lingering as if she were mapping every inch. Her breath was warm against Zara's ear when she whispered, 3. The number hung in the air like a curse. Zara's heart skipped. Genevieve's touch was gentle, almost intimate, but there was something about it that felt like possession or a farewell. Zara lay still, her mind screaming questions she couldn't ask. 3 nights left. 3 until what? Genevieve's fingers stilled, but her eyes stayed open in the dark, watching Zara with an expression that was equal parts adoration and calculation. Somewhere in the mansion, a clock began to chime, its hollow notes carrying through the corridors like a warning. And Zara realized she was running out of time to find out what was coming. The rain had been falling all day, a constant, cold percussion against the sprawling glass windows of the mansion. By dusk, the house was alive with shadows, those that stretched unnaturally long across the marble floors and those that seemed to shift when Zara wasn't looking. She'd spent the past 24 hours replaying every number Genevieve had whispered. 9, 8, 7, 6. The pattern had been chillingly precise. Tonight was 1. Tomorrow, 0. And now she knew exactly what 0 meant. The file she'd found in Genevieve's locked drawer earlier that evening had confirmed her worst fear. Every single woman who'd taken the role of bed nurse before her had simply vanished. No forwarding addresses. No bank withdrawals. Just gone. Their last recorded sighting? Inside this mansion. Zara's stomach churned. She knew what Genevieve was capable of, but now she understood something far more dangerous. Genevieve wasn't just dangerous for her wealth or manipulations. She was dangerous because she treated lives like a currency. At 11:57 p.m., the bedroom door creaked open. Genevieve stepped in barefoot, wrapped in a silk robe the color of deep wine. Her perfume hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating, clinging to Zara's throat like smoke. 1, she whispered. Her voice was slow, almost tender. She crossed the room, every step deliberate, until she was close enough for Zara to see the faint glint in her eyes, the glint of someone who thought they were untouchable. She held out a crystal champagne flute, golden bubbles fizzing to the rim. "Drink to forever," Genevieve murmured, her fingers brushing against Zara's in a way that felt more like possession than affection. For a heartbeat, Zara considered it, not because she trusted her, but because the weight of the moment was crushing. If she refused, Genevieve would know. And if Genevieve knew, she wouldn't live to see morning. But Zara's mind was sharper now, her fear sharpened into calculation. She forced a small smile, lifted her own glass in mock salute, then, in a casual, practiced motion, tilted them in a clink, letting the glasses swap hands. Genevieve didn't notice. She was too busy watching Zara's eyes, maybe imagining the victory of seeing her submit. They both drank. The champagne slid down Zara's throat, crisp and biting. She placed her glass gently on the nightstand, listening. Waiting. At first, nothing. Genevieve continued to lounge on the bed, trailing her fingers across the silk sheets, humming something under her breath. But then a flicker. Her hand trembled as she reached for the robe's tie. Her hum faltered. Genevieve began, but the word broke in half. She pressed her fingers to her lips as if to hold something in. Her breath hitched, eyes darting in sudden confusion. Zara stayed still. She didn't move to help. Didn't even blink. By 3:04 a.m., Genevieve lay motionless, her silk robe twisted around her body, one bare arm sprawled across the bed like a broken wing. The champagne flute lay on its side on the carpet, a pale ring of fizz marking the rug. Zara sat in the armchair across the room, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the body. The sound of the rain outside felt louder now, almost applauding. The sun rose hours later, painting the bedroom gold. When the staff found them, Zara was exactly where she'd been all night, quiet, calm, the sole surviving witness to Genevieve's final, mysterious night. And she already knew what the police would say. Young Heiress dies peacefully in her sleep on the eve of her 29th birthday. What they wouldn't say, what no one but Zara knew, was that for once, the wrong person had drunk to forever. It started with a thick manila folder and a half-broken lock in the east wing, the part of the mansion nobody went into unless they had to. Dust clung to the air, curling like cigarette smoke in the late afternoon light. Zara's fingers shook as she turned the tarnished key she'd found under the rug in Genevieve's bedroom. The lock gave way with a reluctant click, and the heavy cabinet door swung open. Inside, a labyrinth of leather-bound ledgers, envelopes marked private, and a single red file stamped confidential. She spread them across the old mahogany desk, her heart drumming in her ears. There were offshore bank statements, numbers so obscene they made her dizzy, tied to shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Monaco, and Dubai. There were letters, handwritten in a precise, feminine script, laced with threats. One to a judge, another to a politician, a third to a rival heiress. Each one was a loaded gun in paper form. Then came the clincher, a notarized amendment to the will, the one Zara had already read, paired with a backup trust document naming an independent executor, who, through 2 layers of aliases, traced back to a dead woman in Prague, and then, unbelievably, to Genevieve herself under a forged passport. It was all there. The blueprint of the scam, the dirty money, the leverage on powerful people. Genevieve had been playing an orchestra of corruption, and Zara was holding the entire sheet music in her hands. For a moment, she just sat there, breathing, thinking. She could burn it all. Walk away. Start fresh somewhere sunny, with nothing but her own conscience to keep her company. But that wasn't what Genevieve would have done. And Zara, after all these weeks in the mansion's shadow, had learned something very important from her late employer. Power was only wasted in the hands of someone too polite to use it. The next week unfolded like a ballet of chaos. First, she contacted a journalist from a hungry tabloid, someone whose career was built on scandals with teeth. She didn't give her name. She didn't need to. The documents did all the talking. By the time the first headline hit, Heiress death tied to international blackmail ring, the story had already grown legs. Photos of Genevieve at charity galas ran side by side with excerpts from her blackmail letters. Whispers about missing bed nurses became primetime speculation. The press branded it the Heiress bed scandal, and it went viral before breakfast. Next came the legal strike. Using Genevieve's own lawyers against her, Zara filed a motion to challenge the will. She claimed, correctly, that it had been altered under fraudulent pretenses. She produced the offshore records, argued that the trust was built on criminal proceeds, and requested immediate freezing of all assets tied to Genevieve's estate. It worked faster than she dared hope. Bank accounts were seized. Properties were audited. Genevieve's so-called friends evaporated like morning mist. Her family, more interested in preserving their reputation than defending her memory, issued a cold, 2-line statement. We are shocked by the revelations surrounding Genevieve's death. We do not condone her alleged actions. It was the richest disownment Zara had ever seen. Within 3 months, the businesses Genevieve once lorded over were in freefall. Fashion lines collapsed. Investment firms pulled out. Her name, once painted in gold letters over boutiques and hotel doors, was scraped away overnight. And Zara? She moved quietly. The press tried to sniff her out, the mysterious nurse in the scandal, but she stayed a ghost. No interviews. No social media trail. Just a quiet, meticulous transfer of assets into her own name, courtesy of the loopholes and authorizations Genevieve herself had set up to hide them. There were the bank accounts. The private villa in Santorini. A stake in a shipping company that moved art between Europe and Asia. It was more than money. It was control. One afternoon, as she stood in the marble bathroom of a hotel suite in Singapore, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Not the girl who'd arrived at the mansion, wide-eyed and cautious, but someone sharper. Someone who knew the weight of a glass of champagne and what it could decide. She smiled. The world would remember Genevieve as a scandal, but the fortune she'd built on fear and greed now belonged to someone who knew how to use it. And Zara? She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was winning. The city stretched endlessly beneath Zara's penthouse window, a glittering grid of lights blinking like they knew her secrets. 6 months had passed since Genevieve's death, yet the headlines still surfaced now and then, as if the world couldn't quite let the story go. The Heiress bed scandal, a nation's dark obsession. Zara had traded hospital corridors for marble floors, hand-me-down clothes for silk robes. Every morning, she sipped coffee on the balcony while the wind teased the hem of her gown. The skyline was her new front yard, the horizon her backyard fence. She had everything, the money, the view, the freedom. Or so she thought. That morning started no differently. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass, warming the Persian rugs. Zara stretched in bed, letting her bare toes dig into the soft pile. She reached for the glass of water on her nightstand, and froze. The water was gone. In its place sat a phone, an old-fashioned rotary model, painted in a deep, glossy red. She had never owned it. Never bought it. Never seen it before. Its presence was so absurd, so out of place in her meticulously curated, ultramodern suite, that for a moment she wondered if she was still dreaming. Her hand hovered above it. The phone rang. Not the digital trill of a smartphone, but a deep, mechanical ring that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Her chest tightened. She didn't know why, but the sound felt familiar in the worst possible way. She picked up the receiver slowly, pressing it to her ear. Hello. There was no crackle, no delay. The voice came immediately, low and smooth, dripping with something between a threat and a promise. 9. The line went dead. Zara stayed frozen, the receiver still at her ear, her reflection staring back at her in the glass balcony doors. A slow, cold realization crept over her skin like a shadow. She had heard that number before. Over and over. Countdowns whispered in the dark, Genevieve's voice like a noose tightening with each night. 9, 8, 7. But Genevieve was gone. Buried. Cremated. Wasn't she? Zara set the phone back in its cradle, but her hands trembled. She forced herself to laugh, just to break the silence. Probably some sick prank, she muttered, heading to the kitchen. But as she poured coffee, she noticed something else. The faintest scent in the air, one that didn't belong in her apartment. Genevieve's perfume. Her stomach dropped. Zara walked through the suite room by room, checking locks, windows, every shadow. Nothing. No intruder. No trace of forced entry. Yet when she returned to the bedroom, the phone was gone. The spot on the nightstand was empty. Only a faint circle of dust remained where it had sat. That night, Zara couldn't sleep. She sat by the balcony doors, staring at the skyline. Somewhere out there, she felt certain, someone was watching her. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was something worse. She thought about the missing bed nurses, the ones she had read about in those old case files hidden in the East Wing. Their faces swam in her mind. Some of them, she realized, were never confirmed dead. Just gone. She tried to tell herself she'd beaten Genevieve. That she'd ended the game. But maybe, the game hadn't been Genevieve's to begin with. Maybe she'd only taken the first turn. At 3:17 a.m., her phone, her actual phone, lit up on the nightstand. No number. Just one word, 8.